As one can see from the articles that have appeared in mostly the Daily Dot, which I'll be posting in the links, I have been banned from Twitter permanently, supposedly, 3 times, or now 4 times, in the last 2 months. The first ban was instigated by a report by a neo-Nazi out of Brooklyn who opposed the Op Claudia campaign I had launched against ICE and against Palantir Tech for its involvement with ICE earlier this summer. I also got my Pursuance Project account banned as well at that time. The second ban was prompted by a group of FBI informants that are sort of associated with the Mueller investigation. Pseudo-witness Cassandra Ford, not to be confused with Cassandra Fairbanks, who have been unhappy. I'm actually not entirely sure what their motive was, but who reported me as well. The third ban was prompted by supporters of Palantir, and after I posted an email showing that Palantir CEO Alexander Karp was entirely aware of the Team Themis plot in 2011, the exposure of which is what prompted my FBI investigation to begin with. All 3 of these bans were reversed within a few days after press protests, and inquiries and demands for an explanation. This 4th ban that had occurred yesterday was prompted by reports, as these people themselves made clear, by diehard, sort of fundamentalist supporters of Julian Assange, who, as I've written here, like Julian Assange himself, have been unhappy, I guess, and with my criticisms of Assange in the last 2 years after I got out of prison on charges that related to my defense of Wikileaks, for having criticized Assange when I learned some of the things that had come out in 2017, and when I continued to learn other things that we all know that appeared in the press, as well as other unfortunate events that are not yet publicly known, but which are which I've learned more about. Yesterday, some of the elements of the Roger Stone case were released, some of the facts and background there, and I saw that Roger Stone, the former Nixon official and Republican operative that Assange had dealt with on a couple of occasions, at least, that we know about, and who coordinated with him and then acted as the Trump campaign at that time as their sort of point man with WikiLeaks, or I guess they're one of their point men, as far as we can tell. That he and Trump, apparently, who he had been calling, it turns out, on those same days when he talked to others about Assange and kind of complicated. Well, you can see the article yourself. Marcy Wheeler put out some of the portions of what's been filed in the prosecution, seeking phone records and all that. Anyway, there was some indication that Eric Prince, the founder of Blackwater, who is a war criminal of a unique sort, was also involved very closely in the coordination with WikiLeaks via Roger Stone, the coordination during the election, with the releases of the DNC and Clinton emails and all that. And although it's not, a lot of specifics are still unknown, and this is not something that I have learned much about sort of behind the scenes, but it was upsetting enough to me that I wrote on Twitter that that although the U.S. government should not be prosecuting Assange, they have engaged in the greatest crimes on the whole that the world has seen since the 1950s. They have no moral right to prosecute Assange, and they're prosecuting him for things that they know are that they have manufactured in some cases, as I know well, because it hinges on what myself and Jeremy Hammond actually went to prison for, the Stratfor hack, which is why Hammond has now been summoned for a grand jury. Although he shouldn't be prosecuted by the U.S., if it turns out that he was aware of Eric Prince's involvement in what was going on with Roger Stone and Donald Trump, then he should be executed by some other body. I'll show you. I'll post the exact quote so you can see for yourself, so you can decide how you feel about that. I've been critical of Assange since 2017. I did 4 years in prison and was given a $800,000 restitution payment over the hack of Stratford, which I did not participate in, but which I knew about at some point, was told about, and which I obviously supported. I was involved in a lot of defenses of WikiLeaks. I mean, when I say defenses, I don't mean just speech. I mean, exposing activities by Booz Allen Hamilton, by elements of the Palantir and Team Themis conspiracy from 2011. These are things that you can read about. You won't find a full, really comprehensive version of what happened back then in any article that exists today, but you'll find some pretty good ones that really that go into what happened more than others. This is something I've been involved in, something I've sacrificed a great deal over. Since 2011, I lost a position at a blog that I wrote for. The first thing happened in late 2010, even before I got involved with Anonymous, because I outed a government official who was a commenter of that blog who had called for the murder of Julian Assange. And then thereafter, the FBI came after me for my role in making sure the press was on top of elements of what happened with the DOJ, Palantir, HB Gary, these other firms that were seeking to go after both WikiLeaks and its supporters, journalists who supported it, including Glenn Greenwald, in a way that was clearly illegal. That's what led to some secret search warrants that began, I think, between March and April 2011, if I'm remembering correctly. Again, these are still sealed, unfortunately. As is known, for my March 6, 2012 search warrant that is public, in which Michael Hastings wrote about for BuzzFeed after it happened. I was being pursued over HB Gary, over in-game systems, these firms that worked with Palantir on this plot against WikiLeaks and on some other listed things. That was what led to all this. And ultimately I went to prison over Stratford, which really wasn't the issue, given that the Stratford hack was overseen by the FBI itself through Sabu, their guy they had turned into their cooperator. Everything about what I've gone through has been because of my support for the principles that informed WikiLeaks, the principles that WikiLeaks brought to the attention of everyone, that sort of forced out into the international awareness, the principles that WikiLeaks basically, aside from all the things they did materially, leaking, showing secretive and criminal activities of various governments, blah, blah. Aside from the things that they did and exposed, their very existence and their very work and the things Julian Assange was saying and doing, these are the things that forced everyone to think, what rights do a government have? When do those rights end? Is there a point at which they lose, whatever right we want to ascribe to them, legal, moral, otherwise, to secrecy? People have different answers to those questions. I'm among those who had very radical answers to those questions and who agreed quite a bit, entirely with what WikiLeaks was doing back then, and decided that it was my obligation to get involved with that, and I did my own thing as well that was very similar to what they were doing. Anyway, for the same reasons that I got involved with WikiLeaks and for the same reasons that I was willing to sacrifice, it turned out to just be 4 years of my life in federal prison. It turned out to be a huge restitution payment of almost $1 million that comes out of my work, and which has basically made it very difficult for me to live in the U.S. Anymore. But the same reasons that I did those things are the same reasons why I've criticized Julian Assange and some of his supporters. When I say supporters, I mean those who don't just support his legal rights, as I do, who aren't just involved in actively working to defend those rights still, as I am, with Assange's legal team, via Naomi Colvin and a few people who are still working on that against prosecution. I mean, those of us who who have taken steps to try to advance this movement and who believe in this movement, and who do not want to see the movement fail from within, and who have been upset. Myself, Jeremy Hammond, who is still in prison, as I hope most of you know, and who has just been transferred to another prison where they're pressuring him to testify in the grand jury against WikiLeaks. Both him and I are now have become violently angry with Julian Assange over the things that we've learned, and that have, including some of the things that everyone has learned. When I say everyone, I guess I mean those who are paying attention to demonstrable, documented accounts of what's happened. Again, it's for the same reason that we were willing to put ourselves in line for WikiLeaks in the first place. It's because we want transparency. We oppose authoritarian governments. The two of us happen to oppose states in general. Not everyone we work with does. But we have principles, and those are the principles that get us through the day. That got us through the day, at the most difficult times of these, when our families were pursued as well. Jeremy Hammond's twin brother was also gone after as a sort of means of applying additional pressure. Same thing happened to my mother, who was charged and prosecuted for helping hide my laptops when the FBI was coming. These are things that, at the time, eventually WikiLeaks, not as early as I would have liked, but eventually, put out statements about what we had done and why we should be supported. And there are things that I'm still glad I did, despite what profound upset I've experienced in learning some of the things that I've learned and we've all learned. Anyway, just cut to the chase here. So yesterday I said that if he did know about Eric Prince's involvement, that he deserves to be executed by some other body, not the U.S., not any government existing. Didn't really go into detail, but but that that's what you deserve if you work with fascists. And so that's my opinion that I expressed right there. Now, contrary to what you might believe, sort of a casual acquaintance with the movement, the remaining hardcore of, I don't want to say WikiLeaks supporters, I don't want to say Assange supporters, but Assangists, people who have come to see Assange in his person, like his individual self, as the prime subject here, rather than seeing him as a long time sort of leader of this movement, which he was. People who have objected to, I say cleaner hands. Someone is challenging me with this specifics. Yeah, I'm going to post the screenshot as I posted it earlier in our little Signal group. By cleaner hands, I meant cleaner hands. I meant something that is not a criminal government like the U.S. So, and as I specified later in that thread, some questions, I'm talking about, ideally, like what I would like, what I believe, if it would turn out, if the things that they're on the table that may be possible turn out to be true. If it turns out that Assange knowingly dealt with Eric Prince via Roger Stone, then yes, the ideal would be that a revolutionary, group of the sort that we used to have, throughout history before everyone became kind of soft and silly in the West. Ideally, that would be the one to try him and execute him, if that were found to be the case. That's what I said, and that's what I believe. I know that some people are oftentimes just sort of stunned and taken aback by some of the language I use. I've always been somewhat, on the contrary, depressed and astounded at the extent to which these kinds of things are acceptable to people who claim themselves to be revolutionaries, which is very easy to do on the internet or in real life. You can claim yourself to be a radical. There comes a time at which you have to decide who is going to do this work and who's going to make the sacrifices. And if it's not me, am I going to at least allow those who take those sacrifices to have the right to speak, or am I going to actively try to get them banned and deplatformed? And that's the decision that a lot of these supporters, including people who have been involved in my defense and in Jeremy Hammond's defense years ago, long time prominent supporters of Assange himself, Assange the person, rather than Assange the movement leader, rather than the transparency movement, rather than the principle behind all this. This isn't a club or a tribe. It is a principled movement. It's the way I saw it. That's what I signed up for. And having signed up for it, I was willing to do whatever I felt someone had to do. And if that included prison time, and we knew that. We all knew we were going to prison at some point. We didn't know the exact how it was going to go down, but we were told quite plainly, quite repeatedly by some of the FBI informants, some of the ones who got me banned the next to last time. Someone has just said, Julian wouldn't have wanted you banned either. It will take you a few seconds, but you'll find this. Just Google Barrett Brown, Julian Assange, Courage Foundation. Julian, last August, around my birthday actually, I was still on probation, still having to pay off this fine for my book advances. He had me removed as a beneficiary of the Courage Foundation, the group he set up with a few other people, including Sarah Harrison, to assist those of us who have gone to bat for him, and a few other whistleblowers who aren't related to him, including Chelsea Manning, myself, Lori Love, Jeremy Hammond, a few others. He did that. Prior to that, he lied about my group Pursuance Project, claimed that we were kicking out his supporters. He knows full well that I have been involved in his support. Thank you. Someone has posted the link to that for your edification. You don't know what Julian would want. I know Julian and I have never had a conversation. He sent me some vague messages through our mutual acquaintances, but I know and work with the people who were there from the beginning and are still there at the end, even if they no longer see him the same way they used to, and are working as legal defense. So I would not ever want Julian Assange to be banned from any platform. I would never want him to have his speech curtailed. I would never want him prosecuted, and that is why, despite the extraordinary measures he's taken against me, and despite the really disgusting things that have happened, that started happening at the very moment that I decided that I had the right, after 4 years in prison and everything else in defense of them, that I had the right to say, no, what he did here was wrong. What he did with Trump was wrong. And when he said that he wasn't involved in the 2016 election, he was lying. And now that's not an opinion that I just hold, that crazy Barrett Brown just hold because he's mad because he went to prison. Of course, I spent the first 8 or 9 months out of prison continuing to be involved in fundraisers, for him and for WikiLeaks, blah, blah. When I was asked upon getting out of prison if the donations going to me could be put into the common pool for Courage beneficiaries, including Julian Assange himself, I said yes. And so of the $14,000 that was going to help me to pay off the $800,000 that I was ordered to pay by the court for Stratfor, the hack that led to the gift files, I was convicted for that because I called Stratfor and asked them to, if there was any information in the emails that the hackers had stolen that might get someone killed abroad, one of their contacts, for instance, and if I could arrange for we could arrange for a redaction. I would talk to, Jeremy Hammond and the others. This person has acknowledged that I'm fully entitled to my opinions. Yeah, I appreciate that. Thanks, man. Keep up the good work. So I called Stratfor and tried to get these things, tried to ensure this was done properly and that this was done the way that the government's claim that they want it to be done. You hear a lot of things about, they're going to get our people killed somewhere at these releases. So they don't actually care, of course. That's what they ultimately convicted me for when the copying and pasting a link to the documents, when that had to be dropped, those charges. So anyway, it was decided, by everyone from Assange on down, this stranger elements of WikiLeaks supporters, most of whom have sort of come on in the years since, whether they be Trump supporters who they like anything helps Trump, they like that, or they're evangelical Christians who think that the UN is run by Satan and blah blah, or if they're whatever. There's any number of reasons for people to support what WikiLeaks is doing because it helps the cause they believe in, not transparency, but their cause they believe in. There's also people who are entirely principled, who support WikiLeaks, who believe in transparency and who support Julian Assange's rights, and I'm among them. When I say support, in this case, again, I'm talking about the actual material support I've been giving to the legal defense, his, and now Jeremy Hammond's as well, despite a number of factors here that I've tried to ignore because this is the work that we do. Anyway, you can go and look. You can't actually, I guess, see it all now because Twitter suspended the deals, so you can't. But I'll post some more versions of this later. But I think you can still see some of the things that some of these same Trump supporters, I would say Assange fundamentalists have been gleefully writing about, and a couple of them have reported me. They claim to my probation officers. They don't seem to realize I went off probation a few months ago, but they said the guy, whatever. The guy reported me to the government of the UK. I don't think he did it properly. I think the guy might be a little bit nutty. Because he also reported me to Roger Waters, the Pink Floyd singer, and to Tulsi Gabbard, who was running for president. There's some kooky people, of course, who have got involved, and that's always going to be the case. It's nothing to blame Assange for, but the percentage of very active, active in the sense of posting messages on social networks, blah, blah, of WikiLeaks supporters who are just bizarre and in some cases disgusting, like Sandra Fairbanks, neo-Nazis, that kind of thing. Kim.com. The percentage has gotten quite distressing. I just said I reported you to Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan sees everything. He knows what we do. He's watching down on us all. So you just wasted your time by doing that. Anyway, so that's just the situation right now. I'll post the comments. I'll post the notification from Twitter while I'm banned. As usual, one of the people who actually believes in free speech, a journalist at the Daily Dot, has inquired with Twitter to ask them why I have been banned, and I'll show you the reason. Just to paraphrase, I'll post the actual language they used in the notification I received. But the reason was because apparently it's against Twitter policy to wish harm or emotional distress against someone else. And so if that's really if the rule that's going to be a hell of that's going to be a real change on Twitter. But of course, what I actually did was said that if this thing is the case, then it would be ethical, it would be correct and just for this person to receive this consequence. And of course, in this consequence, as I quite happily said, would be execution. If someone, while taking millions and millions of dollars in donations, and frankly, stealing donations from, as he started the guy out there, I thought he was trying to ask me for directions. So if to the extent that someone has received the support and the resources that Assange has over the last 10 years, and to the extent that has, some of that was money that would not have gone to a cause, that had not gone to him, but some of that is money that might have helped with other ideas and other initiatives and other work that is being done, and sometimes people who are perhaps, perhaps merit some support themselves. I think they have an obligation not to lie to the world and their supporters and secretly violate the principles they espouse publicly because they think that they have got a great plan on how to disrupt the U.S. military machine by putting in charge the Republicans, which I don't think was a great plan. There's a lot more that can be said about this, and some of which I've already, I've said in the past about some of these same issues. You can find them. You just Google, if those of you who are actually interested and want to see some of the background here, I will note that this is a person who has happily taken $10,000 of the $14,000 that was donated to me after my sentencing to help me pay for the restitution to the company that from which these emails come that WikiLeaks has put out. He's taken that money happily, causing the leader of the executive director of Courage Foundation to resign, Naomi Colvin. You can see an article about that from back then. Just look up the names. There's just a number of things that are just disgusting, and there's a reason why certain people who were once very actively and publicly involved with WikiLeaks and Assange, there's a reason why in the last few years they have either stopped talking publicly or have begun to criticize him. There's a reason that people who were with him early on, like Birgitte Jonsdottir, who was an Icelandic member of parliament for the Pirate Party, who was depicted in that movie they made about WikiLeaks, that I hear isn't very good. I haven't seen it. Fit the State, and who's on our board of directors. Thank you. Zachary Coons is posting some articles in the background. There's a reason that a lot of people who know what's going on and who are not having to rely on the WikiLeaks Twitter accounts or some stuff they heard on a comment on Facebook, blah blah. There's a reason that there are people who have decided that this movement needs to be reformed and that WikiLeaks is probably not the best vector to go forward. That Assange his rights must be defended, both for his sake as an individual human being, because he should not, regardless of whether or not I have come to hate a person, whether or not that person has done what I think is harm to me in a way that's entirely unjustified, given what I've sacrificed for him and happily. Regardless of all that, he deserves his rights, and more importantly, the press has to be protected from the DOJ and its bizarre and authoritarian, borderline fascist assault on the free press when the free press turns out to be too free. It turns out to be too good at what it does. That's something that has been an issue increasingly, in my adult lifetime, particularly in the last 15 years or so. It's important that they receive support. It's important that these issues be, kept in the public fore. But it's the most important thing of all is that they be expressed honestly and correctly, and that we not sacrifice the purpose of this movement in order to perhaps supposedly better support elements of the people that make up that movement, or the individuals themselves, or some argument that we may not deserve to win. That's something I've said before, and I think that when people, I think there's some portion of people who are still perhaps, when they see these conflicts, they don't understand why I'm doing what I'm doing, and they don't understand why some of these other people like myself, Jeremy Hammond, they may not understand why Jeremy Hammond has denounced WikiLeaks, or denounced Julian Assange in recent months publicly. They probably don't know that he did so. That's one of the things that Jeremy Hammond, does not have much ability to get his message out because he's in prison, and when he started criticizing WikiLeaks, he lost, the sort of infrastructure that gets your message out. Jeremy Hammond's, opinions are no longer welcome among Assange partisans, because Jeremy Hammond considers Julian Assange to be a white supremacist now, and he said as much in the few weeks after his arrest in a statement that you could see in an article that appeared in Germany. I guess I'll link to that too. Bottom line is that, and I actually don't agree with that. I don't think he's a white supremacist. But again, Jeremy Hammond, we didn't get along that well back in the day. That's one way to put it. We get along pretty well now when we talk. But this is somebody who's in prison over WikiLeaks, who is once again has just lost 2 more years of his life apparently, because they want him to talk about WikiLeaks, and he almost certainly won't. It's unimaginable that Jeremy Hammond would do that. And when we have a group like this that is built on transparency, but then sins against transparency to an extent that has happened over the last several years, then that's when it's time to start talking about how we fix this movement, because the movement is too important to be left to what we might feel, what we might like to think. It is not fun. I can assure you. I know it's not fun to have to, to hear like, hey, this person that you see as a great hope, and as this leader of this thing that has happened, that he has, in fact, done some things that are inexcusable, and that a lot of some people involved with him have done likewise. It's difficult to have to agree with a portion of what the FBI might claim happened. I don't like the FBI. They've come to my house, with a SWAT team, and crushed my ribs, and they indicted my mother, and they tried to get me in prison for the rest of my life. And the only reason they didn't is because, because of the great assistance I got while I was in prison, and because they just lied too many times to be able to accomplish what they trying to accomplish. Anyway, that's enough for now. Bottom line is that, and I'll go into this later. I'm have to finish some things with the book I'm putting out. But to finish that thought, it is difficult to accept, criticism of oneself, but sometimes it's even harder to accept criticism of one's heroes. And I can assure you, as someone who lost pieces of himself in the process of this, it was not a happy thing for me to learn some of these things, and to have to decide, what I was going to do about them. It's been a process that has done a great deal to. It has made the stuff I'm still trying to do harder. It's made things harder for those who work with me very closely, who are also, in many cases, people who have sacrificed for the movement, for WikiLeaks itself, for Assange, for other things. It's tough, but if you are not capable of doing that, then you don't belong in this movement or any movement, and you should get the fuck out. And that goes for anyone. Doesn't matter if they're the leader or someone who, it goes for everyone. No one is above criticism, and no one is above justice. I'll just end by saying that this is sort of this is a bridge too far, and given what else that is not public, that is also the case in this, that kind of makes this even more egregious from my standpoint, with the standpoint of those who are aware. I've decided that because these things have happened with Assange's own involvement, because he publicly lied about me on, I think it was late 2017. He did maybe early 2018. I've written about it elsewhere, and you'll see it. I'll compile these things again. Because of this, and because I've now realized that my Group Pursuance project and the groups I work with and the projects we oversee, like the 29 leaks, where we're we're doing the same thing WikiLeaks did, but we're doing it without any money. We're doing it in a way that makes our lives harder, but we're doing it. And every time this stuff like this happens, it disrupts it. It means if I don't have my Twitter account, it means that I can't recruit journalists in Guatemala and Hong Kong and elsewhere to go through these emails that have been stolen, that have been stolen from a company that does big shell companies for dictators and kleptocrats. Goes through them and exposes these crimes. It exposes which government official took money from which developing country and hid it with the help of what Western scumbag, so that money can be given back to people that believe it. When someone interferes with that, I consider that to be something well and far beyond the kinds of things that I've had to deal with over the years, the kind of things that I think were unjust towards me. And so I have no choice but to respond, and that's why the next few days I will be publishing materials showing that former WikiLeaks lawyer and Courage Foundation board member Margaret Kunstler sought to have me take the fall for the credit card numbers that were put out by others during the hack of Stratfor, and that she sent a series of emails to my mom before my sentencing, after my sentencing, in which she made some claims that were false in order to try to convince us to go along with that. And then after that, I'll be publishing some more materials showing someone else, I'm not going to name him now, a recording showing some other misconduct. But and then we'll just go from there. But I can no longer, it's one of those things where it's becoming a them or us situation, and I've been watching them for a while, and I'm not convinced that they are entitled to do the things that they seem to believe they're entitled to. And so I'll have more on that later on. I'm finishing up the book project that I've been working on for years, actually the next few days, and so I will, you'll hear it when it happens.